the gig. I'm going to try to keep this to no more than 20 minutes. I can't see the chat window, but I would encourage you to ask as many questions as you have. And I told Mike not to be shy about interrupting me if he wants to during the presentation. And if not, we'll take questions at the end, but super excited to share all of this information with you. Let's go ahead and get started. Hey, you've heard about the healthcare crisis in the United States, and from my estimation, the real crisis has to do with what we spend on healthcare, and that probably leads you to ask the question, hey, Brian, how much do we spend on healthcare? The actual amount is a crap ton. I just made that up, but it's about $4 trillion a year. That's right, trillion with a T. $4 trillion a year is what we spend on healthcare. And you know, $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there, pretty soon you're talking about real money. That's a big deal. It impacts the economy in profound ways. Here's the most recent chart I could find about healthcare spending in the United States. Apologize for the small graphic. I don't have a graphic designer anymore. But what this is essentially telling you is that it isn't just the total amount that we spend, it's that the total amount that we spend on healthcare in this country continues to escalate, often by double digits every single year. Back in 1970, we only spent $100 million on healthcare, and now we are at $4 trillion. This is during a time when inflation, the way we normally think about it, and somebody's talking in the background, so I just want to remind you that you are probably not muted. But during a time when inflation, the way we normally think about it, the consumer price index has been managed carefully. We often have low single-digit inflation overall. Healthcare costs continue to escalate, often by double digits every single year. Somebody I was talking to once said, wow, healthcare costs have really exploded. And I said, yes, they have. That explosion has now lasted for 50 years. Here's some other ways to think about this. Almost one in every $5 that is spent on anything in the United States is spent on healthcare. It's literally almost 20% of our GDP. Another way to look at that is every single day we spend $12 billion on healthcare in the United States. During this meeting, we will spend $500 million on health. We will spend $1 million in the time it takes me to read this slide. Hopefully you're getting the point that we're spending a lot on healthcare in the United States. This is a graph that's essentially showing you what percentage of the gross domestic product is spent on healthcare, and as you can see, it's getting up near 20%, or one in every $5 that we spend in this country is spent on healthcare. Here's my all-time favorite statistic. And by the way, note that this statistic is now 8 years old. We spend more each year just on artificial knees and hips than Hollywood is collecting at the box office. That gives you some sense of the scale of the challenge. We spend a lot on healthcare. This is 8 years old. I haven't found a more recent statistic, but my guess is now we're spending more on left artificial knees and hips than Hollywood collects at the box office. So if we're spending that much, a natural question to ask would be, hey, what are you getting in return for all of that? We must be the healthiest people on earth if we're spending so much, and we're spending aberrantly more than every other developed nation. And the unfortunate reality is we're not really getting as much as you'd like to see. This rather busy slide is showing you 4 different graphs that compare U.S. healthcare spending to other developed nations' healthcare spending. So that's the part on the left. And as you can see, we are an outlier. We are spending far more than anybody else. And it's a statistically significant amount. But what are we getting in return for that? Well, not as much as you'd like. Our average life expectancy is around in the middle. Our percentage of folks who are overweight or obese is really high. Our infant mortality rate is not particularly better than these other countries, and the diabetes admission rates, again, these are just some basic ways to look at health in the United States. And again, spending way more than everybody else, not getting a lot of bang for our dollar in terms of improved health outcomes. That's what this slide is sharing. So you might ask the question, why do we care? Is it a big deal? That might be beyond the scope of this conversation, but generally speaking, yes. To the degree that we spend money on healthcare and the government spends money on healthcare and businesses have to spend money ensuring their employees, it makes the U.S. economy less competitive. And the impacts are pretty substantial. Every dollar you have to spend on healthcare can't be spent somewhere else, for example. And it makes manufacturing in this country less competitive relative to some of our peer group because of the cost of healthcare being built into what we're manufacturing. So it is a pretty significant issue and a drain on the economy. The next likely question you would have is, hey, why? Why are costs rising so fast? Why do we spend so much on healthcare? And you could literally take a graduate level course studying this, but you got me, so we're going to look at this a little more simply. There are a lot of different ways to look at it, and I'll look at it in a few ways, but here's one basic way. It's the story of widgets. Think of healthcare as a widget. Why are we spending so much on widgets? There are three main factors. Stay with me, three. The first main factor is something it's a concept we're familiar with. It's inflation. Inflation means that same widget costs more this year than it did last year. So I go to see my doctor, and last year it cost $100, but this year it's $105. Guess what? If you're evaluating why healthcare costs are so high in this country and why they continue to escalate, inflation, meaning the same thing costs more every single year, is not a significant factor. It matters a little, but that's not really where the rubber hits the road. This very busy chart is showing you, it's comparing, the red line is showing you the increase year over year in medical care. So how much inflation there is in medical care versus the blue line, which is basically the consumer price index. Is the red line higher, generally speaking? Yes. But is it dramatically higher? No. So what's the takeaway from this slide? Inflation. Same thing, costs more year over year, does not explain why we spend so much on healthcare and why the costs continue to increase. So it's not inflation, what is it? Well, we've got ourselves some fancier widgets. And what does that mean in terms of healthcare? Well, technology's great. We have access to amazing technology. Everybody on this call has probably had an MRI. Many of us have had knee or hip replacements. Many of us are taking prescription drugs that were not available previously that treat things, and I'm not suggesting any of that's bad, but we have to have an adult conversation about the cost of all of those fancy widgets. Think about this. Healthcare is the only industry I know where technology and advancements in technology actually raise costs, they don't lower it. And so there are new treatments for cancer or new drugs that become available, and the therapy costs $1 million a year to be on. That's great. If I need that drug, believe me, I want it. But the reality is the widgets themselves are fancier. The intensity of the services that we get are increasing, and that has a substantial impact on the increasing cost of care. So fancier widgets. The biggest deal, however, is we are buying more and more widgets. And this is, look, this is humor on a Saturday. There's Oprah. You get a widget, and you get a widget, and you get a widget. What am I trying to say? We are consuming more and more healthcare. Relative to our peer group of developed nations, we consume healthcare at a voracious rate. Some of that is expected because our population is aging. And so some of us are getting older. Or all of us are getting older, and we have a slumping population, and as you get older, you need more. But that doesn't explain all of it. The average person is consuming far more medical care now than they did in years past, and that really drives costs up. So if you're thinking about this in terms of widgets, inflation, not a big deal. Same widget, it's a little more expensive every year. It is the fancy widgets, and it's the number of widgets we buy that drive the costs up, and which is why we are now spending $4 trillion a year on healthcare in the United States. Now, it does, honestly, it merits mentioning that healthcare, whatever we're doing in this United States, it's generally quite a bit more expensive in the United States than it is in other countries. And so here's some very recent data that came out, and you could look at just about any medical service, but here's abdominal CT scans. How much in the United States? $844. Well, you'd be happy if you lived in Spain because it'd be 1/10 the price. You have perhaps heard of medical tourism as an industry. What does that mean? You literally get on a plane and go have your transplant or whatever it is done somewhere else because it's actually less expensive to do it that way. And so there's some other data here about just things cost more in the United States. Why do they cost more in the United States? All kinds of reasons, and some of which we'll get into here in just a second. Hey, wait a second. I don't know if you knew this, and there's a lot going on at the federal level with our government, but I don't know if you'd heard just this morning, the president announced a new law related to buying cars. And he's got his hands full, we all do, and yet he came out with this new law for buying cars. And so I wanted to tell you about this new law for car purchases in the United States. There are 3 new rules when you buy a car. You work with me here. Number 1, when you go to buy the car, you will not be told how much it costs. You can ask as many times as you want. You can get creative and try to figure out the cost of the car, but no one will tell you what the car costs. Got it? Number 2, you will have access to no quality data. For today, maybe you go to Consumer Reports and you look and you say, well, the Ford Taurus is pretty good, but I like this Toyota Camry too. Let's check them out. Or maybe you go to J.D. Power and Association. That's how you compare quality. Going forward, you will not be allowed to have any access to quality data about the car. And so far, you don't like the rules because you're thinking, gosh, I would like to know the price and I'd like to know something about the quality, but you will like the 3rd rule. When you go to buy the car, somebody else will pay for it. Now, in case you hadn't figured it out yet, no, that's not actually the new rule for buying cars. But what if it was the new rule? What would happen to cars? Cars would get impossibly expensive. And cars, you'd start to wonder about the quality. But what we have just done is describe how we make major healthcare purchases in the United States without access to cost data, without access to quality data, and without any incentive to care about cost, because largely speaking, somebody else will pay. Everybody wants to find the bad guy. Why do healthcare costs so high? There would be a bad guy somewhere. You know what? There really isn't. I mean, sure, there's a prescription drug manufacturer that does some bad things, or sure, there's a bad administrator somewhere. But at the end of the day, I look at this like an economist. We have a system that doesn't work. We have a bad system, not bad players. We have a system that does not reward improved quality and lower costs. We have a system that rewards doing as many healthcare services as you can for everybody who comes in. And we have a system that pays no attention to costs. My wife has to get a colonoscopy on Monday. She's super happy I told you that. And because we have a super high deductible, like $12,000 or something, we'll pay cash. She tried for a long time to figure out what it would cost. Called lots. Nobody could tell her. I mean, that's not okay. That's not acceptable. I have to pay out of my pocket or through my health savings account for this. You should be able to tell me what it costs. I'd like a world where everybody had a website where I could find out what you charge. And I could look at your quality data. And I go, oh, well, these guys are the least expensive. And their quality metrics are really good. I think I'll go there. I'm not the first person to come up with the idea of capitalism, but it certainly would be interesting if principles of capitalism were applied to healthcare, which they are not today. Okay, so that little illustration is part of another way to look at why costs are so high in the United States. So it's been a big deal. It's been our probably most significant domestic challenge for many, many years, decades even. And so you have to go back 12 years ago, but President Obama was elected, and he made healthcare one of his principal priorities, and so he passed the Affordable Care Act. So the Affordable Care Act came along, and it shuffled the deck quite a bit. Here's some basic evaluations of the Affordable Care Act. Number one, it's very complicated. It's 2,700 pages long, I know, because I read it. Did you know that when they pass a law, that's just the law? It doesn't tell you how to do the law. If you passed a 10-page law in Nebraska about hog confinements, we might get 50 pages of regs that tell you how to do the law. Now imagine that you passed a 2,700-page law, federal law, that reformed 1/5 of the U.S. economy and ceded regulatory authority to 7 different federal agencies. How many pages of guidance would need to be issued? Well, we're past 100,000 now. So it's complicated. Funny thing is, I mean, it's marketed well. It's the Affordable Care Act, but it's really not about care so much. It didn't change a whole lot about how your doctor gives you care. It changed a lot about insurance. And what did it change? Well, it did some major stuff. It got rid of underwriting. In other words, you hear about the pre-existing conditions thing. You can no longer be denied health insurance because you have pre-existing conditions. A substantial majority of people are in favor of that. All of the plans don't have lifetime maximums. They used to. You could run out of benefits. Not anymore. Your kids can stay on your plan till you're 26. That's a big deal. The individual market really has changed substantially, but for most people, the government pays most of your premium now because you get subsidies from the government. It made it a law, basically, that large employers with a lot of employees have to offer coverage, and it expanded Medicaid. So those are, look, it's 2,700 pages, but those are some of the major things that it did. What was the outcome of all of that? Well, one of the main goals was to lower the number of uninsured people in the United States, and it did that. The uninsured population dropped from about 15% to about 10% now. So and that's significant. So we have a lot more people insured. Actually, the uninsured rate has been creeping up under the Trump administration, and we don't have 2020 data yet, but it'll be much higher given all the job losses due to COVID. So it lowered the rate of uninsured. If you happen to be somebody who buys your own insurance and not through Medicare, because you're not on Medicare yet, so you're just out there buying your own insurance, the cost exploded. In the first 2 years, premiums went up 69%. They've gone up another 73% since 2016. Why did that happen? Well, because there's no underwriting. Like, if you're an active cancer patient in the hospital, you can sign up for, during the open enrollment period, insurance plan and get it. So of course costs went up. This is not a value judgment. It's just what happened. You guys can decide if it was good or bad, but that's what happened. So the average family premium is now over $1,100 a month. but the government pays for most of that through subsidies. And almost everybody, this is true, almost everybody who buys individual insurance under 65 now, most of their premiums are paid by the government through subsidies. Another thing that happened is in the individual market is the plans really got crappy. And by crappy, I mean the cost sharing was super high. Maybe you have a plan like this where your deductible and your out-of-pocket maximum is just crazy high. They've been worse in the individual market, but if you have a plan through your employer, it's pretty bad there too. And there's some data about that. In the group market, so in other words, you're getting your insurance through your employer. I mean, there were changes, but less dramatic, frankly. Yes, costs continue to go up, but not dramatically faster or anything due to the ACA. But average family cost for an entire year, $20,000. The deductibles are high. So yes, of course, we've seen, I mean, the premiums are very, very high, and employees are asked to pay a higher and higher percentage of the premium as costs go up. It's interesting when a law, we're almost done here. We've got about 2-3 more minutes and then we'll get to questions. When a law passes, eventually the business of the world gets to reacting. And so some things that happened as a result of the ACA passing, you've seen a lot more enrollment in short-term plans. We'll talk about those in a little bit. Health sharing ministries, I don't know if you've heard of all of the different health sharing ministries. They tend to advertise on the radio a lot. They're not health insurance, but they're kind of like health insurance. You've seen enrollment in those. A lot of people started businesses because individual insurance got so expensive. It was less expensive if you had a business. And I used to work with people all the time, like, well, it's going to be $2,000 a month, but what do you do? Well, I repair musical instruments. Great. You're going to have a business, and we're going to get your coverage through your business. Some employers are reluctant to hire people full-time because they have to offer coverage. So you see a lot of people were shoved into part-time work. And this is kind of in the weeds, but a lot of small businesses are offering self-funded plans. That's probably a little more complicated than we want to get into. So you had the ACA, didn't solve all the problems. It lowered the uninsured rate and offered some subsidies for folks to buy really expensive individual plans. What did the Trump administration do? Long promised but never delivered was a Trump plan. Like, what is the actual Trump plan? But that's not to say that the Trump administration didn't do anything, because they certainly did some things related to health care. First of all, there were a lot of lawsuits versus the Affordable Care Act. The most recent lawsuit, again, questioning the constitutionality of the law because it has a mandate to buy coverage. A Texas court ruled it was unconstitutional. It went to the Supreme Court. They heard arguments, I don't remember when, but we're expecting a ruling from the Supreme Court in June about that. What will likely happen? Honestly, even with a more conservative court, I doubt they strike down the law. In fact, that would be shocking. I think they might find the mandate is unconstitutional, but the rest of the law can stay in place. Other things that the Trump administration did was effectively take away the mandate anyway, because they cut the penalty to zero. They cut marketing of the ACA for the exchanges and things by a lot. So you didn't hear as much about the exchanges, although people kind of know how that works now anyway. They did pass some executive orders to make short-term major medical plans a more viable option. They're much less expensive than comparable ACA plans. They're not quite as good, but it was just a marketplace reaction to that. So ultimately, under President Trump, I mean, they took pot shots at the ACA, but it didn't in any wholesale way change much at all. That's kind of how we would look at that. So finally, what will Biden do? I'll tell you one thing. What happened in Georgia with both Democratic candidates winning Senate seats could be a big deal. if the Democrats want to jettison filibustering and therefore pass things without a 60% majority in the Senate, that would actually enable Biden to enact some of what he said he was going to enact. And up until the Georgia stuff happened, it was kind of like, well, he says he's going to do this, but we all know that's not going to happen. Now it might. His version of healthcare reform is, not surprisingly, to build on something that he was a part of, which was Obamacare. Significant things in his plan include a public option. So you're out there as an individual buying health insurance, and you could buy straight from the government, or you could buy from Blue Cross, or you could buy from whomever. I guess. You wonder if the government will cheat and make their plan better, or be willing to withstand losses that private companies can't withstand. They say that everyone will be eligible for subsidies if you're buying a plan in the individual market. The biggest thing on this slide, by the way, are the last two things. They would lower the Medicare eligibility age to 60. So today you have to be 65 before you can sign up for Medicare. They'd lower, that would be a big deal. It would be the government taking a larger and larger piece of the total pie. The government already pays for a ton of healthcare in this country. And then negotiating drug prices, which is a big deal because we pay far too much for prescription drugs in this country. This is the last slide. And rather than get into all of this, I'll let, if people want to ask about value-based care or Medicare for all or the Brian Gillette plan, which you definitely want to hear about, then we can talk about that. But other than that, I think, Mike, why don't we open it up for questions? Mike, you are still muted, by the way.
Well, this is Jack Heidel. I don't know if am I muted? I unmuted myself. How can we control costs? I mean, you've described the horrendous cost of healthcare. So what can we do? How can healthcare costs be controlled? I mean,
okay, that's a terrific question.
It has to be done. I mean, is this the Brian Gillette plan, or I mean, what we have to do something, and what can we do?
Okay, so appreciate the question. Thank you very much. I think Jack, it is. He asked, okay, so what can we do to control the costs? In some ways, the three things that are on this slide would get to addressing those. Again, remember this. If you remember nothing else, remember it's a broken system that doesn't reward cost efficiency and quality. So most of what I hear related to plans like having a public option and all of that, that to me is shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. The whole thing's still going down. One approach that you hear something about is trying to pay for value-based care instead of just paying a lot every time somebody goes to the doctor or has something done. Instead, looking at a group of medical providers and saying, if you take really good care of this population and they get healthy and don't need a lot of care, then you get reimbursed for that. It's a very complicated concept there, and we are nibbling at it. Under the Trump administration, there was some effort to do some value-based reimbursements with what are called accountable care organizations. The problem is, right now, if you were a doctor or part of a hospital group or something, the amount of care that you deliver that's reimbursed using that strategy is so small, it doesn't change your practice pattern. So it hasn't had any impact at all. Another question, the other thing on that slide was Medicare for all. Would Medicare for all be a good idea? I mean, maybe. The one thing Medicare does that's foundationally different than the private market is it pays very little for care. So the government's a big payer. And they go out to the providers, the doctors and the hospitals and say, we're going to tell you what we'll pay. And they pay a lot less for a doctor's visit, for an x-ray, whatever, than the Blue Crosses of the world. They pay like 60% versus what like a private carrier would do. So why does that matter? Because if we went to Medicare for all and they didn't change their reimbursement, healthcare systems would really struggle. Many would go out of business because doctors and hospitals often lose money if they treat a Medicare or Medicaid patient. And if suddenly everybody was Medicare or Medicaid, you'd have some critical care hospitals and things that would struggle to survive. Would it lower costs? I think you could make that argument because the amount they would pay for stuff would go so far down. But what would be the consequences in terms of access and things? They could be really, really challenging. To me, the smartest solution is the Brian Gillette plan. I wrote a 2-page law. I'll tell you what it does. And in my plan, here's how it works. Every single doctor, hospital, etc., has to publish their fee schedule, not some made-up thing, but what they actually charge. And you can look up any procedure and you can find out how much people charge. The other thing that would be required is every doctor, hospital, etc., would have to publish what is called their outcomes data or their quality data. Let me give you an example that I think will make this make sense. I have 3 daughters. I know, it's just amazing. And they're pretty older now, but when my youngest daughter needed ear tube surgery, you've heard of this, of course. Kids get their ear infections, you get them enough, they want to put a little tube in their ears, it works great. So she had this done, this is like more than a decade ago. And so we took her into the place. It wasn't actually just a little surgical center. We're literally there less than an hour. They wheel her away, and then they're walking us to the recovery room, and they wheeled her right by us. I mean, the surgery took literally 3 minutes. I think they just go, whoosh. So we got the bill. This is 10 years ago. $12,000. And I was like, what? So let's take a look at that bill. Well, $3,000 for the surgeon. And I'm like, I get it. I get it. You got to go to school a long time. I don't want some quack operating on my daughter. So sure, $3,000 bucks. The anesthesiologist, $3,000. I mean, I don't know. The surgery lasted 5 minutes, but look, medical malpractice insurance is expensive. Okay, I'll go with that. The facility charged us $6,000 bucks. We were there for less than an hour. They didn't even let us keep the little gown they gave her. That seems expensive to me. In my system, every doctor has to publish their quality data. So now Brian Gillette needs to take his daughter in for ear tube surgery. All right, who does that in Des Moines? Well, there's 10 different places that do it. We'll start with quality. It's kind of hard to jack that up, but let's just see if anybody did. Well, here's somebody who cut somebody's ear off before, so we'll take them out of the mix. Of the remaining ones, what do you charge? These guys charge $12,000, but these guys charge $2,000. Guess what? I'm going to go to these guys. And as soon as enough consumers at the point of purchase start making decisions based on quality and price, the people charging $12,000 per ear tube surgery are going to figure out a way to charge less, or they're going to go out of business. So you have to have every doctor publish their quality data. You're a heart surgeon. Great. What percentage of your patients die? What percentage are readmitted within 6 months? I need to know those things so I can make an informed decision about where I want my heart surgery. And also, how much do you charge? And of course, for all of this to work, you'd have to have health plans sort of like we do today with a lot of cost sharing in them so that me as a consumer, I'm super motivated to find the cheapest one. I had to have an MRI done on my back not too long ago. I live in Des Moines. You'll be happy to know I supported your local economy in Omaha because I drove to Omaha because I found one for $300. It was $1,100 in Des Moines. I got plenty of people I can see in Omaha, so I went there. That's the Brian Gillette plan. The likelihood of that passing is less than 0, but I do think it would lower costs. Okay, Mike, what do you got?
Brian, I have a question here from a person who worked in the healthcare industry for 48 years, from Mary. Mary, would you unmute and ask Brian your question?
My question is from a nurse's point of view. I see we talk all the time about the insurance industry and the costs and things. We don't talk about how healthcare is delivered. My big example is I'm 79 years old almost. I am on Medicare, of course. I have been relatively well throughout that time, so my healthcare costs aren't that much. Why can't I go to a nurse practitioner when I'm healthy, see them, use the doctors for people who are sick? Now, I got really sick once in that time period. It took me 2 months to get into a pulmonary specialist. That's ridiculous. We need to be providing care through other providers other than just doctors. We need to be using nurse practitioners. We need to be using physician's assistants, and it could make our healthcare costs much lower, and we'd be getting the same care. And we need to be we need to have really, really good care for our people who are real sick.
Yep, and Mary, I gotta thank you very much for your question. And I want to tell you, you and I are speaking the same language. I am a very big believer. If you're looking for something optimistic and something that can lower costs and improve quality, Mary's on to some really important subjects. I am a big fan of seeing nurse practitioners for routine services. I'm a big fan of seeing physician's assistants. They get to spend more time with their patients, and for less complex cases, they are a superb and lower cost choice. So you're lowering costs, you're improving quality. I'm a big fan. I am also a big fan of, if you're looking for optimism, one dynamic that will lower costs and possibly improve quality is telemedicine. Here we all are on a Zoom call on a Saturday morning and enjoying the advances of technology. I am a big proponent for the right things to do telemedicine. In other words, honestly, like a month ago, I broke out in hives. I'm so happy to tell you that. I think I just broke HIPAA. And I don't know what it was, but all I did was I have access to telehealth. So I went onto my computer, literally within like 5 minutes, I was pulling up my shirt, showing some doctor, and he's like, oh, let's get you a prescription for steroids or whatever it was that they needed to get me to, so I could quit itching myself. That was fast, cheap, efficient. So telehealth, and as Mary suggested, nurse practitioners and physician's assistants are really terrific primary care ways to lower costs and I think improve quality. What else you got, Mike?
Brian, Brenda has an intriguing question about one of your proposals or one of your the realities that we have to face to reduce costs, and that is outcomes. Brenda has an intriguing question about that. Brenda, would you unmute?
That's the camera on. Hi, this is Brenda. I'm actually sitting here with Mark. I'm swapping back and forth as I walk around the house. So my question had to do with quality of care metrics and healthcare outcomes. And if doctors are forced to focus on healthcare outcomes, will that encourage them, or I guess discourage them from taking on a more complicated case or someone who is medically fragile, because it's more likely to have a negative outcome, hurt their healthcare outcome rating?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say, Brenda, you're my friend, and therefore you're not allowed to ask hard questions. We had an agreement here. Okay, so Brenda's asking a terrific question, and she's asking a question many physicians and hospital administrators would be asking, because anytime you mention quality as it relates to outcomes data, doctors bristle and they get pretty nervous about it, because every doctor will tell you, and I know because I have 6 of them in my family or through my in-laws, they will tell you that their patients are sicker. So these quality metrics aren't fair. The data, if you're a big data proponent, Brenda, and if you understand all of the data that's now captured through a patient interaction, there are ways to manage out the intensity of the case and still produce a reliable outcome score that takes into account the severity of the case. I'm a believer in it. There would be many people, if you invited them to speak, who would say that those aren't as precise and as good as they should be. But the short answer to your question is, Brenda, it's a valid concern, but the data accommodates the difference in the intensity or the severity of the case, so the outcome data should still be comparable. But thanks for the question. All right, you can ask hard questions, it's fine. Mike, what do you got?
Yeah, Jay has got a question that I wanted to ask. So Jay, if you would unmute and ask your question about what the high percentage of healthcare spending in America versus other countries and outcomes.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. So we pay the highest percentage in the world by far, I believe, but we don't have the best outcomes. I mean, we have a great healthcare system, but overall, we don't have the best outcomes. I think I saw a figure the other day that we were like 25th or 27th in the world as far as outcomes or quality of care overall.
Sure.
Some of that, of course, because it's so expensive that people don't use it. So how, other countries, and I posted a second question, which can kind of be combined. Other countries do it better. They spend less and they have better outcomes. Why can't we do that? And I think some of that might tie in with socialized medicine. So I was wondering about, in America, I think we hear a lot of bad things about socialized medicine, that, you wait forever to get care and things like that. So I'm kind of curious what you think about socialized medicine, the good and the bad of it. I'll kind of combine 2 questions together.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. And Jay is exactly right. I mean, all of the data does not lie at all as it relates to cost and quality. In the United States, we spend far more, and I mean like double some other developed countries, but we spend far more than anybody else. And the outcomes we get, if you're measuring them based on things like life expectancy, infant mortality, diabetes rates, et cetera, the outcome data is really bad. Jay mentioned he saw something that we were 25th. If you were spending the most and 25th in terms of outcome, you'd say there's something wrong with this system. Here are my comments about socialized medicine. One thing people should probably recognize is that we do have some socialized medicine in the United States today. Medicare is a social program. It's primarily funded through the government. Medicaid is, and that's health insurance for folks who are poverty stricken, is also socialized medicine. The VA is socialized medicine. So the United States government already pays for a really significant percentage of the healthcare. So we do have some socialized medicine in the United States today. My political inclination and economic inclination for most of my career was to resist socialized medicine, because I believed that a marketplace solution similar to the one that I just described would drive down costs, Jay, and improve quality. However, I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm not asking that you share my opinion. I don't care, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I have given up hope that we can solve healthcare in this country. I dealt with it for 25 years and did not see us accomplish a whole lot. So at this point, I actually expect us to get to Medicare for all eventually, which is essentially socialized medicine. Will that be better than what we have today? It could be. It might be. It might be if doctors and hospitals can employ fewer people to deal with the administrative nightmare of dealing with a bunch of insurance companies. It could be, and this is a big if the Medicare payment system is designed to reward quality, which it does not do today. What it does today is take a meat cleaver and just pay everybody very little, which frankly would lower costs and would force doctors and hospitals to figure out how to operate in a different environment. But I think the potential outcome there would be access challenges and quality issues. But I will say this. You know how, I love this society, right? You're the free speech society. And you got some Democrats here and some Republicans here. And guess what? You're friends and you might disagree, but you understand you're not demonizing one another. There's too much demonization in politics. I'm not telling you something you don't know. In the United States, there's too much demonization of the concept of socialized medicine. Yes, of course, you might have to wait longer, and that's a big deal. Ask our friends in Canada. But it's not like it's going to, I don't think it would be, I think it would be better, frankly, than what we have today. It took me a long time to get there, but frankly, I think it would be better than what we have today. And I don't have a lot of faith in our political system of having a mature conversation about what the actual problems are and what drives them, and then coming up with marketplace solutions. So in the absence of that, I think a Medicare for all system is better than what we have. What Biden's going to do if his plan gets enacted, which who knows, but it's just another baby step towards that. Lower the Medicare age, increase the subsidies. It's basically getting us there more slowly. I hope that answers your question, Jay.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a question, a personal question, because I have some friends that are practicing doctors, and they complain about the administrative costs constantly to me. And I think you mentioned it, Brian, in your procedure for the ear for your daughter, the cost for the facility.
Yeah.
Seemed really incredible for the amount of time that you spent there. And so I just want to mention that I retired now, but I was a asset manager for a mid-sized company organization, and I had us join a group purchasing organization for health products called Healthcare PG, and you may have heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
I was astounded. I would go annually to their meeting every year, and I was astounded at there would be like 3,000 or 4,000 of us there. That number of hospital administrators that were there, and the discussions about all the materials that hospital uses, from wall vinyl to MRI machines. And it seemed like a massive, massive deal. Do my doctor friends have a point that administrative costs are incredibly high in this country and not justifiable measured by the ability to deliver service?
All right, so great question. And the question really has to do with the administrative component of the cost in the United States. I would say absolutely your doctor friends are onto something. All of the data show that in the United States, the amount of the bill that is devoted to administrative work is much higher than in other countries. And part of the reason for that is, frankly, we have a gobbled up system. Medicaid, Medicare, private insurance. There's all of these different insurance companies and different rules and processes that the providers have to accommodate to get their bills paid. If you compare the amount of administrative load for a US-based healthcare system versus a Canadian system, the US system has far more. And so presumably, if you had a single payer Medicare for all system, those costs would go down. It would presumably. those costs would go down because you'd have a single payer and it would be a more streamlined system, and you wouldn't have to fight with different insurance companies about what their rules are. That is part of it, and that would lower costs. We would still, in my estimation, want to just lower the bill, because that by itself, Mike, does not explain why the cost for the same procedure in the United States is up to 10 times more than what it might be in a Western European country. But they absolutely have a point, and you could absolutely make that less burdensome if you went with a more streamlined payment system.
Thank you. Thank you. Mark has a great question, and we haven't discussed it yet. Mark, would you unmute and ask your question? Go ahead and unmute, Mark.
I'm the Mark you're referring to. Where does preventative
Mark Sturzman.
Okay, can everybody hear me still? Okay. Okay, so preventive care is a big, big deal. Let's actually expand the conversation, Mark. Beyond preventive care, let's just talk about wellness in general. Because another reason we spend so much on healthcare in this country is because we're not very well. I don't want to insult anybody, but estimates that I've seen, reliable estimates from peer-reviewed, credentialed folks who look at this suggest, think about this, 50% of the cost of healthcare in this country are due to preventable conditions and due to behaviors that lead to preventable conditions. So Mark, if you remember graduate school and all the things we shouldn't have been doing on Saturday night, well, there are health outcomes. So $2 trillion of the $4 trillion we spend on healthcare could be saved if we were healthy and exercised and ate right. Now, why are we so unhealthy in this country? That's not a healthcare challenge. I mean, it is, but that's an why does a box of Twinkies cost less than 2 apples? Because we subsidize corn syrup and we do all of these things. I mean, it's an absolute, that's beyond the scope of this question, but if we were healthier, yes, it would help a ton. Absolutely. Now, the question about preventive care, in my estimation, is slightly different. There is one aspect of healthcare where preventive care immediately and forever lowers costs and improves quality, and that is dentistry. Because if you go to the dentist twice a year and you hadn't been in a while, you might have a root canal or something you got to do, but after that, you're going to be good. Brush your teeth, go to the dentist, you will avoid, in most cases, high-cost dental care. That's not true in healthcare. Mark, I wish it was. But the reality is, like the Affordable Care Act gives everybody a free, meaning you don't have to pay a cent for it, preventive exam every year. I hate to tell you this, but that's a waste of money for most of us. If you're a healthy 25-year-old guy, you do not need a full workup every year. You just don't. There ought to be common sense guidelines, and we should apply them. So when you're 50, yes, you should get a colonoscopy, for example. But so I'm not saying I'm against preventive care. What I am saying is it's not a panacea that lowers costs on the medical side. It does on the dental side. And what we should do is have scientists and doctors come up with schedules, and we should align the payment mechanisms to be aligned with those schedules. So yes, as you get older, you need more preventive care and should go be seen more often and all of that. It absolutely should be in the plan, but I want it to be common sense and based on the medical data. Hopefully that answers your question.
I've got 2 questions lined up here now. The first one will be from Ken, and the next one will be from Carrie. Ken, unmute, please.
I had a couple of questions. The first one was, let me go up and look.
Political.
Let's start with this one. Do insurance companies and big pharma influence congressional senators, representatives, in the money given to politicians? I'm just assuming that there's a lot of money that they give these people to keep their conglomerate, because I agree with the person down here, Carrie, who said that there's no competition among the providers. So, you know, how much influence are the insurance companies and the big pharma in terms of changing the rules? I think the outcomes do need to be published. The costs do need to be published, but I think that the hospital conglomerates and the insurance companies and big pharma are going to resist that. But what's your opinion?
Thank you for the question, and I agree completely. The first part of that question is, are they influencing politicians? They sure hope so, because they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars lobbying. When the Affordable Care Act was being debated, everybody threw everything they could at it. It's part of why we got such a gobbledygook Byzantine law that is just impossibly complex. They absolutely spend millions and millions on lobbying. And I think they've been successful because, to your point, they absolutely resist efforts to require them to publish cost data or quality data.
Right.
And so far, they've been very successful. And the pharmaceutical industry is certainly guilty of that as well. I mean, look, we pay way more for the same drug in this country than every other country does. And there's a rule, there's a law that says Medicare and Medicaid can't negotiate prices. And I will tell you that in Biden's healthcare plan, it does say they will eliminate that law. So it'll be a good test, Ken, if they ever actually try to do that, because we kind of have our hands full right now in this country with some other stuff. But if they ever try to do that, the lobbying will get real intense, and we'll find out if they're, able to. But yes, of course, lots of money in politics. And look, you have an industry that is 20% of the GDP. They got plenty of money to spend on lobbying, and that has been part of why it's been hard to change things.
Okay.
Okay, Carrie, you're up. Carrie Winter.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Like the Verizon commercial. I appreciate, Brian, your comments today, because I think you're spot on virtually in every case, every point that you've made. But one of the things that I think has made healthcare expensive compared with every other industry is a lack of competition. I don't know, if you go out and drive around Omaha, my goodness, there's a new hospital in every street corner. And I don't know any other industry out there in which you add to the providers and prices go up. And that's essentially what's happened in healthcare. And I personally was involved in healthcare administration for a long time. And everything we tried to do really kind of met with problems because there was no competition among the providers, and they could virtually charge whatever they wanted to do. And I've thought about a market-driven solution to this for a long time, but I'm kind of like you. I've pretty much given up on that, because unless we can really reconstitute this whole system and insert competition in it, I don't think there's going to be a possibility for a market-driven solution. And that's unfortunate. I'm disappointed in that, but I really believe that that's the case. I mean, competition has created jobs, created industries. It's driven down prices in virtually every other industry but this one. And you're right on in terms of being able to publish prices and such, but I'm afraid that that's too little too late. Comments to that?
I agree. And I look at my own, the absence of competition, because what elements have to be in place for a provider system or a hospital to compete with each other? Well, you'd have to have consumers who had access to the information they needed to make smart, cost-effective, quality-based decisions. And again, my wife appreciates me talking about her colonoscopy. I mean, she's having a colonoscopy. I have to pay for it, or we have to pay for it. I mean, we're like literally going to pay every dollar of it. Of course, I want to know what everybody charges. And of course, I want to know whatever their quality metrics are. And I don't have access to any of that. And we're savvy. I mean, we've been at this for a while. We still couldn't figure it out. And so in that system, there is no competition. We went like this. We'll pick this one. I hope they don't charge us too much. But to your point, they pretty much charge whatever they want. And so I'm kind of where you are, because for many, several decades, I was like, let's get market-based reforms out there so that we can introduce competition. We have been unsuccessful, nor do I currently see the political will or even the political intelligence, frankly, to pursue something like that. And so in the absence of that, I'm kind of like, Medicare for all is better than what we have now. But go ahead.
Well, and one other comment, a fundamental difference is, and you touched on it in your presentation, is that we have third-party payers. And what's missing in this whole system is the discipline and the judgment of a consumer out there who's actually paying the price. Yeah. I don't see a free market system can be successful until we breach that and have people understand what they're paying. And that's a lot of what you're talking about. As long as you've got third-party payers out there, you're never going to have a competitive system, and you're never going to have a system that I think is subject to the free market forces.
Yep, I would agree. I personally, like I mentioned, my MRI, I have made decisions based on cost. And I was an informed consumer and checked around, and like I said, drove to Omaha for it because I had to pay for it. It was a high deductible. And that one was easy to find cost data about. But there aren't enough stories like that, I'm sure you would agree, to move the needle. So the needle is not being moved at all. And practice patterns haven't changed, and costs continue to go up, and that's kind of where we're stuck. Thanks.
Okay. Harry, did that help?
Yeah. You talking to me?
I have a question here that this participant in the meeting wanted me to ask. So I'll edit a little bit into it myself. Is there a partisan argument against publishing the cost of specific healthcare procedures? And my input would be here that my experience as an asset manager was managing a huge fleet of vehicles, and the CO2 that came out of the tailpipe, for example, was a concern. But there were arguments that were advanced on a partisan basis that said, I'll give you the extreme, CO2 is good for trees. So is there partisan arguments against the publishing of specific healthcare procedures? And are they informed at all? Or are the arguments?
I missed the very end of that, Mike.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes. Are the arguments intelligent? Are the partisan arguments intelligent, or are they crazy like CO2 is good for trees, let's have more to get, put out more CO2, for example? I guess that's the implication of the question. Are these partisan arguments intelligent at all? Yeah, all right. So let's address the part of the question that has to do with partisanship. If the person asking the question, if it's about political partisanship, I'm not aware that one party or the other is especially against publishing fee data. I think hospitals, doctors, et cetera, are generally very opposed to publishing fee data. And they would have all of their arguments, and they would be better at articulating their arguments than I would. But I don't find those arguments to be sound. I won't question the intelligence of them, but I don't think they're sound arguments. I think consumers deserve to know before they have something done what it will cost. And if a provider, what they will typically tell you is there's no way we could tell you that. That's in part because they have to live in a horribly complex system, and they have what they call sticker prices, and then what they actually pay to insurance companies or the government or a cash payer.
But the short answer to your question is, I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think the providers very much don't want to do it, but I think they absolutely should, because I don't think the arguments against it are as valid as they would have you believe.
Okay. We have a question from the sign-on is Ruth and Terry McNamara. If one of you would unmute, whoever wishes to ask this question about insurance companies.
I have several things out there. My last question is, what's the incentive between insurance companies? It would seem like the buck stops with the insurance companies. Why haven't we seen any action from them to control costs?
Yeah, and I think I'm a little more comfortable speaking on behalf of the insurance companies, having worked at one for a long time. I'm sure what they would tell you, Ruth, is that they do all kinds of things to try to manage costs on things that you and I may not like prior approval processes or pre-certification processes, or developing plans that encourage you to use a generic drug instead of the brand name drug. And then they negotiating with providers. They always talk about, we get a really great discount because we pay less than what the provider, you know, those percentages are always kind of fictitious, because the provider can make their sticker charge whatever they want, you know, and, oh, well, we got 50% off. Well, but so what the insurance companies would tell you is they are doing all kinds of things to try to lower costs. Whether, obviously, they haven't been as successful as any of us would like. Did you have other questions?
I had one from Kathleen a little while back. And Kathleen, if you would unmute and ask your question about how do you fix costs for services based on, you know, the variation of the client or the patients that need it.
Good morning. I feel like that's kind of already been addressed. I was just talking about how, you know, if I think we've already addressed that question.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it was a great question, though. I mean, everybody that walks in to buy an automobile, that might not be an issue, but if you have two patients that need heart work on their hearts, they come in with different health risks.
Right. So what I was talking about was when we were talking about having the data posted, how, you know, if you're trying to say your outcomes, if your outcomes are positive or negative, it seems like it's a little more very complicated based on the patient's where they're at when they come into you.
Yeah, and Kathleen, so in order to get valid outcome data, you have to do risk adjustments, and you have to, you know, manage it out through the data based on the patient's health when they arrived and the intensity of the intervention and all of that, so that the outcome data is valid. Because every heart surgeon will tell you, well, my patients were, you know, the least healthy when I got them. And so there are ways within the data to manage that out so that the outcomes data is comparable.
Going back, Jay Buchanan, you had a question about political structures and healthcare costs. Please unmute, Jay, if you can. Otherwise, I can ask the question. Jay's question was, what would the impact be if political structures are removed from healthcare? Would this harm or improve healthcare outcomes?
Yeah, and I think I would need, Mike, a definition of political structures. There is a lot of administrative structure, of course, based on the insurance companies and the government as a payer and things, but I'm not aware of, I guess I'm not understanding what they mean by political structures.
Jay, are you with us? Are you on? Can you amplify your question? Okay, we will pass. Let's see. Okay, Victor, you had a fairly long question here, but I'm going to ask you to unmute, Victor, and ask your question, please.
Okay, you're talking about the one I asked like an hour ago?
Yes.
Okay. You know what? Can I ask a different question? Because
Yeah.
mine was okay. Mine was almost more of a comment.
Okay, very good. Ask a different
Okay.
question.
Well, yeah, because I was typing it as you just said this. So my partner Rick was saying that we just had a riot at the Capitol recently, of course, which everybody knows about, which lit a fire under Congress to finish their job that they were supposed to do, and it was very unpleasant for the public to watch. But we don't ever see anybody out there on the streets protesting about the cost of health care. It just doesn't seem to be something where people would go out there and say, we need better health care, and to make a big statement about it. And do it now. And we need to do it now and find a way to light a fire under Congress in not the same way. We don't want people to get hurt, but to do it in the same way to force Congress to act a little bit. What does everybody think about that? What does Brian think about that?
I appreciate the question, and I agree with you. You know, it's interesting because everybody has their own experience. Believe me, I shouted at them from the mountaintops for 2 decades about this problem, and I'm happy to say that the net result of my work was nothing good happened. So I finally gave up. I think, you know, here's a philosophical reaction to your question. I feel like the country has an attention span or a capacity to deal with only so much at a time. And I think with everything that you mentioned with the riots at the Capitol and everything else going on in the administration really the last 4 years, I don't think the healthcare issue was able to crowd its way into the nation's consciousness, which is unfortunate because for many decades, I described healthcare costs as the most significant domestic challenge we faced. I mean, we had, you know, terrorism and other things that we're concerned about, but domestically, it was the biggest deal. And we got a lot of attention, of course, when President Obama was elected the first time. It was really all we talked about for about a year. I was disappointed in the law that got passed because I don't think it did the right things. But do I agree that there should be a lot more attention focused on this issue? Absolutely. Do I foresee that happening in the near-term future? No. If things settle down politically, and if we can get to a point where we're all operating from the same reality a little bit, then sure, I think Biden wants to take a look at this. Although basically his proposals are, you know, mostly baby steps towards more socialized medicine, but they're not grand scale sort of Medicare for all approaches. I know we're kind of saying the same thing, but right now the country's not in a place where we can even tackle things like this. It seems like to me.
Can I say something on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can, yeah.
I agree. I agree with everything on that. Part of the problem is the media does, like NBC, ABC, CNN. I could go on and on. The attention is mainly, we talk about the nation's attention. The attention seems to be on the presidency, totally. And I know that with that incident, you have to pay attention to that. But since the ACA law was introduced and decided, there's not been a lot of media attention been on the healthcare, and there should be. I don't even see public television, national public television or NPR talking about this. So that's my comment on that.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's a very difficult subject. And I think that all media companies exist to get more eyeballs looking at them, and so they like to show things that are controversial and evoke an emotional reaction. And so the current president certainly succeeded to doing that on both sides of the aisle. So yeah, they have not. There hasn't been as much media attention either as I think maybe would be appropriate given how significant this issue is.
And I want to thank you and everybody here for really great questions following a good presentation. We're down to about our last 10 minutes here, and it's all right to hang on for a little while after our 10 p.m. Meeting time. But I wanted to give Rick Galusha some time to talk to us about future upcoming meetings. And thank you again, Brian. Thank you. It was really, really informative. I've got 2 pages of notes.
All right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Terrific questions. A lot of fun talking to you this morning. Thanks for joining me, and I'd be happy to come back depending on what happens with the Biden administration. So thank you very much.
We'll keep you in mind for sure. Thank you, Brian.
All right.
Rick?
All right, so we've got a couple of things we wanted to let you know about. We, of course, have formed a secondary group to free speech called Omaha Watch and Learn. And the idea behind Omaha is we all watch a video together, and then we get together and discuss it. And so this month, we're going to watch a film called Holy Silence, which was recently on PBS. And the director then of the PBS documentary will get together with us in early February to discuss his film, which aired on the public broadcasting system. So we're very excited about this. And we've scheduled a time to watch the video. So in the Saturday preceding our Omaha Watch and Learn event, we'll just air the video and you can tune in through Zoom and watch it. There'll be no discussion at that time. And then the next week, the director will be with us. So I think it's a pretty exciting opportunity to talk to someone that's made a documentary on the importance of speaking out against bad behavior specifically. And that'll be our February Watch and Learn meeting. In February, for the Free Speech Society, I've been talking to Don Bacon, and Congressman Bacon has agreed to engage in a panel discussion in which he'll be one of 3 or 4 participants discussing what can the individual do to try to heal our nation's divide. And so we're currently choosing participants for that panelist. One of them is a young woman named Alexis Martinez. Martinez was the class president at Central High School when she graduated. She's currently a master's student at Bellevue University, and she's a Omaha community columnist and for the Omaha World Herald. And she's also active in the Black Lives Matter movement. So we have 2 interesting speakers. We're going to look for 1 or 2 more, and that'll be the free speech event for our group in February. One of my concerns, to be honest with you, is that I want to create an environment where we can invite people to come in and speak, and I want to avoid a situation where our group becomes a platform for people to launch attacks at elected representatives, in this case, Don Bacon. So I'm a little concerned about that. I've been speaking to Don quite a bit about this issue, and I think he'll make some good contributions to the conversation. And so I just wanted to make you guys aware, because I think when we have Bacon speak to our group, there'll be a much larger audience. And so I guess I'm just trying to say we're aware that some people increasingly feel that they have the right to commandeer other people's agenda and make it their own. And that, I assure you, will not occur in our group. We're not going to put up with that. So with that, we have exciting opportunities with Omaha Watch and Learn and the Free Speech Society in February. I hope you'll join us. I hope those of you who, I see lots of new names this month, so I hope you'll come back and tell some people as well. So Mike, that's all I got.
Great. Now, and for you who participated in the meeting today, I want you to know that our membership in the surrounding area and outside of the Omaha metro area is now at about 350 people. So if you wish to make comments and you are part of the private group, Free Speech Society, and you wish to contribute something to that, please feel free to type it in, and if it complies with, with the guidelines of civility and quality discussion, we're definitely going to want to have that on our private page. So thank you all for being part of what we do and for hanging with us here now that we can't meet in person. I look forward to the day when we can get together again and have real donuts and real coffee. So and that's going to come. And so hang with us here. And I hope today was a educational experience for you. It was for me. Brian, I want to thank you again publicly here for your knowledge, just your depth of knowledge in this area. So with that, if you wish to hang in a little bit longer, Joe, is that okay? And have any kind of a discussion. But our meeting is officially concluded for this month.